Hey guys, how's it going? In this video, what I'm going to be doing is creating a small display base for the full character that you'll be seeing later on. Now, to start with it, I've got this resin plinth here. I don't know the exact size because I've sort of sanded down the edge. If I get a ruler here, it is. It's almost 45 mil. It's about 44 mil. Doesn't need to be exact, it just needs to fit the model and have enough space around the edge to give some interesting and frame it almost. Now you can see this little mark here is the overall size of the connecting base bit of the model. I've just done this to help me drill the pilot holes here. These three bigger holes, those are done because I'm going to be using milliput, and those just help when the milliput goes in there and it dries, those help keep it secure. There wouldn't be a problem with it coming off anyway, but this is just taking precautions, being smart about it. Now, the pilot holes, where I'll be pinning the model. Now, we will be covering this whole area, so I won't know where these are. So one little thing that I like doing, whilst we use milliput and the likes, is I like to stick some cut-off paper clips, because I always pin using just 3 mil so I can chuck paper clips in it. And what I do is I just keep these like that, just so I keep the holes empty, as it were. So that's just a useful tip. Now, when I came to thinking through what I'll do for the base on this character, is I looked at the color scheme for the character I've actually painted, and there's a lot of reds, a lot of pinks, and some greens. Those are the pink and green, or reddy pink and green, are the two main colors. So I thought about complementary colors that go with that, and I think blue would be quite nice, sort of a deepy, icy blue. So I thought, why not go ahead and go for a snow base? I think that'd be quite fun. It'll look really cool. So we're going to be working on making a snow base today, this little plinth. And I will go into how I build it and paint it. So the first thing that I think about is the way the base is laid out, how shapes and forms work. So what I'll usually do is stick, before I start milliputting and creating the basic terrain, we'll get the big forms in and then sculpt around them. So I've got here a piece of terrain, just from one of the Games Workshop plastic terrain kits, and I've sanded it down, so I've got quite a cute angle there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place this on the base like this. So just give a nice little bit of detail. I'm not going to be placing it right up against the edge. I'm going to give a little rim around there of black, just to have something to play around with. So the first thing I'm going to do is place this. So take some super glue. I know roughly, I've had a look, the model on the actual being pinned in, and I know it looks good. I don't want to show the model off because it'll ruin the surprise. Now, it doesn't matter if I cover up any of these pilot holes, not the end of the world. If I just find a rough place to stick it. I like having little bits come off and go over the base. It just adds some more personality. Of course, you don't have to do this. It can be a bit of a pain to transport, but I'm going for the cool factor here. So just make sure it's super glued on. Now, is there going to be any? I've got this little piece, little frame of window here, that I might want to stick on just as an extra piece of interest. Sticking off this way. So what I'm going to do is take my clippers, and I'm going to just clip it out. I'm going to be covering some of this up with milliput, so it doesn't really matter about getting a nice fine slant on it, because at the end of the day, it will be the bottom, the connecting area will be covered up with milliput. So I'm just trimming off some of this, some of the excess. I do want that slant to give me more surface area for the super glue. At the end of the day, the milliput will do a great job of sticking that. So I kind of want it like that. Just some nice angles to work with. This area I'm going to leave rocky. To have some more natural shapes on that third of the base. This is just my thought process for these things. You get into a nice sort of pattern flow of how to approach these. You can end up with some really, really cool stuff. Cut that whole bit there off. So this is going to be sort of like a buried in snow ruin. There we go, that'll do. I'm being generous with my super glue because I don't want it to come apart and fall off when I start miller putting it. I'm going to add a little dot just in there. Just connect it up. And these are larger forms. So this is how I'm going to be starting the base off. I'm going to use these and build around these. So next up, we're going to wait for these to dry, and I'm going to come in with some milliput, and I'm going to start building up a rough area and adding things like bark and little bits of rubble to create a rocky terrain. So I have mixed up some milliput here. This is just your standard normal milliput. It is incredibly useful stuff. I prefer this for the terrain basing stuff over green stuff because it's a lot more cost effective and easier to work with. It is a bit messy, but once you clean off your hands, it'll be right. I just suggest you don't touch the model whilst you've got the milliput around. So I've got the little bits of paperclip in to keep the pilot holes. Now here I've got some bark. These are just bits of bark that I found. Well, they came from larger bits, but then I've cut off and sort of discovered the nice shapes. Here, this is a really good trick. This is dried milliput that I've crushed up and broken up with a hammer. This comes from all the excess milliput. Sometimes, well, more often than not, I'll have a lot of milliput at the end of something, and I'll leave it to dry, and then I'll crush it up when I need it, and you can get some really nice shapes and textures out of it. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay out our rough, what would you call it, sort of area of the base. I'm going to move these upwards now. Then I'll show you when I decide to use these. So I've got a little bit of water here next to the milliput. What I'll do is I'll just take off a slice, whack it in there, push it into the little pilot hole we've made there. Make sure it covers. And what I'll do is just build up the area, the rough terrain. Now, if the tool you're using, this is just you can see I've used this a lot. This is nothing special, it's just a cheap sculpting tool. So I'm just moving it around, pushing it into cracks and crevices. I don't want to cover too much yet because we've still got some of these rocks to add. A lot of them will be at the forefront of this side. So if you imagine it's split up into thirds. I'm just pushing it around. I'm just defining the edge. Now I'm gonna put some under here and fill this in a second. So what I'm gonna do is break a little bit off, move to a different tool, this pokey one. I'm gonna take some of that. I'm just gonna get some water on the tool. I'm gonna push, just kind of form it in. This won't be the most visible area, but we want to make sure it looks good regardless, because you never know where people are going to look, especially if you're doing something for a competition. People have a habit of looking exactly where you think they won't. So any bits of detail you might have missed become very obvious. Now with this tool, we're just making sure it's in the gaps. You can come back with the other tool in a second and really shape it. So doing this means you don't need to perfectly sand flat the plastic. Of course it helps, but I'd still do this regardless, just to really connect it with the base. You don't need it to be massively obvious and in the way. You can just very subtly put it into some of the smaller cracks, just so there's no obvious areas where plastic is disconnected from the actual base. Now, I'm going to switch back to this tool, back to more of a larger shaped building. The water on the tool, like I said before, it stops the Milliput from sticking to the tool, so if you find it sticking, get some water in, place it in there. I don't want to cover up too much of the detail here. The areas where you can clearly see a join or a gap, you want to fill those. For the most part, you still want to keep it looking like the rubble of the same building or similar buildings. The surface doesn't need to be the flattest, smoothest surface in the world, because I will be coming over with some dirt and making it look like it is rubble. So we don't need to have a smooth surface because we're not going to be seeing that. It's going to be covered up. It's quite useful to build up a clear defined edge. It can help remove the terrain, the environment from the plinth in a way that it's like the frame of a picture. It helps frame it and keep whoever's looking at it looking at the correct areas. Right. Now we've got a rough shape starting to build. What I'm going to do, just push some of that in. Doesn't matter having Milliput on the top surface, we can clean that up very easily, even once it's dried. It's extremely simple to do. So we've got a rough kind of area built up. A little gap there that I'll just quickly fill. Now, I'm going to start taking some of these pieces, and I'm just going to be carefully placing them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to squish it in to the Milliput, and then we kind of want everything to be pointing out of the plinth. Create some interesting shapes. Keep this area here, a little circle, basically where you think the feet are going to go of your model. You want to keep that area clear. You don't want things obstructing that. I want to cut a little bottom off this. Use my clippers. Messy, but gets the job done. That's too jagged, I think. Work with some more bark for the second. These flat pieces are really nice. They're really, really good to work with. They work perfectly with the actual model and the miller part, and they create some really nice shapes. Getting some really nice shapes building up. This one doesn't quite fit how I'd like. So what I'm going to do, just get the middle part off there. Just going to trim the back end. And just push it back into place. It's starting to look really good. Now, whilst we push these in, we didn't really use these pieces. You sort of figure it out as you go along what does and doesn't look good, and these pieces just were too chunky. Maybe we can break them up and add them as rubble or rocks in the later base. So next up, because we pushed these in, it displaced a lot of the miller part. So now what I'm going to do is take our tool. I'm just going to sculpt it, sculpt the miller part back in. You can incorporate the rocks into the terrain. You've just got to be subtle and think about the placement of it and where it would build up, where it would connect, disconnect. You can come up with some really, really nice looking stuff. But quite a large chunk of milliput there to help that blend back in. Now when the milliput dries, it will essentially glue the bark in, but I'm still going to come back once it does dry and super glue the bark just as a sealing method, so it's not as brittle and it doesn't flake or anything, and it stops any outside effects like cold or heat or time really degrading it. Keeps it nice and fresh, or just preserves it, in fact. I can see here there's a little bit of a gap. So what I'm going to do is have this sort of, sorry if I've been saying sort of a lot, I'll have this terrain here curving down almost like a ramp, just to add another interesting shape into the mix. Get a bit wild with it. But because I know roughly where the base of my model, the connecting bit, will go, I know where to keep flat and where to try and keep detail away from. so it doesn't get in the way when I try and pin the model in. Now on an area bark like this, what I'm going to do is bring the milliput almost completely up to the edge of it. Because the reason we're using this bit is because it creates a really nice overhang here, just like that rocky cliff face that you'll see in some Arctic environments. Once again, because it's quite thin, little gap under here, taking our pointy tool. What we don't want is any gaps or areas that look disconnected. I make sure it all fits in and works nicely with each other. This is why I love milliput for this kind of work more than I do green stuff. Green stuff would be a real pain to do this with. It would just be sticking to everything and then coming apart in big chunks. It would just be a bit of a headache. Things like sculpting fine detail or characters, filling in gaps, great for. But for this kind of work, I much prefer milliput. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than green stuff too. You saw when I showed the packet, it's £2.99 for 2 large sticks of half and half. Basically, because when you use milliput, you mix 2 halves together. Once they're mixed, the base is dried, thanks to a nice and hot sunny day. And as you can see, I've taken the paper clips out. Makes it so much easier to pin your model, and you don't have to deal with any faff. You just know exactly where to go. So what I'm going to do is just put the drill in, clear out anything that may have gone in the way. We're all good. And once it's hardened, or at least semi-hardened, it's really, really easy to go in there with a knife and then deal with any areas that you might want to edit. So what I'm going to do here is just flatten this out. So for when I do attach the model, a nice flat area to help glue on. Of course, the pinning is going to do a lot of the work, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So now I'm just going to go around, clean up any little areas that might need it. I think we're pretty much good though. As I said, all of the ground will be covered with dirt in a second. And for the most part, the base will be very snowy, so I'll obscure any areas or any horrible bits of surface that you don't like. Now the next part is I'm just going to come in with some super glue, just put it on top of the bark and all the areas of bark that are showing, just to seal them in, give them a nice coat, make them less brittle. So I'm going to go and do that. Got my little upside down base with some super glue in here. This part is pretty self-explanatory. So I'm just using a paper clip to apply super glue to the exposed areas of bark, making sure not to get it on any of the plinth. If it goes on the details or any of the milliput, that's completely fine. It won't do anything bad. We just want to avoid getting it on the plinth, because that might leave a mark that shows up later in painting and priming. So just making sure we're really careful around the underside here. You don't really have to worry about putting too much on. The bark will absorb it, which is what we want. Once that's done, we will start adding some of the little areas of interest, little details that add some things to look at. So the bark is sealing in the process of drying this typically. So we can move on to adding some little bits of detail. Now I've got these things here. What I've got is a couple of skulls, one with a bit of damage, one without a jaw. I've got a Death Guard head that I've trimmed and sawed, basically flattened that edge so I can lay it on. It looks almost half buried. So we are going to place these on the base. Now, for placement, I'm going to start with the biggest one, the Death Guard head. I'll model, basically, when we look at it, this will be the front. I'm thinking potentially Death Guard head about here. It's got a nice point, and it's crossing with the angles that we've got going on here. We've got some really nice angles. So I'm going to take some super glue. You could just use the dropper for the super glue and apply it directly on, but I figured this stuff in the base hasn't dried yet, so use it whilst I can. Now, it's not fully connecting on all sides. There's a little bit of gap, but when we add in dirt and when we add in snow, that's not really going to matter. Put a bit more super glue, make sure it's properly stuck in there. There we go. Now, for things like skulls, I always like putting them in little hidey holes or nooks where you don't really look in the beginning. So this area in here, I think that'd be quite nice for a little half skull. So take this guy, I'll just do a test fit first. So at the moment, you can see his head's a little bit too big. Skull's a little bit large for it. So what I might do is use my clippers and trim this guy just to fit a little bit easier. The face is the important bit. So as long as we get that detail, we will be fine. Another thing I can do is try with my knife, just carefully cutting away some of the milliput, just making a nice little divot for the skull to rest in. Be really careful not to touch the actual plinth. Trim just a little bit more of the top of the head. We want to make sure stuff we do trim off, we won't really be able to see it when it comes to paint. We don't want to see some sheared off bit of skull. So this is why test fitting is really useful. You get an idea for what you need to do, so you don't just go ahead and glue it straight away and realize it looks a bit naff. So let's have a look at this. Now, while having the border is nice, you don't need to be 100% limited by it. For example, there we go, we've got quite a nice position. And it looks quite naturally placed. A little bit more trimming and it'll fit perfectly. It's in a nice little hidey hole where it's not hidden away completely, but you'll notice it, think, oh, that's pretty cool. And that's what we're going for with these things. There we go. Nice and buried in there. And now we'll take it out. Make sure this bit's properly cleaned. And we'll come in with our super glue. Trying to be as accurate as possible. There we go. Nice subtle little skull. So you can't have a Warhammer miniature without a skull, can you? And then just some super glue around the edges. Once again, making sure not to touch the plinth. Just to make sure this guy's secure. So that's him. And then finally, we've got a third skull that we need to figure out where to put. Now, I like working in threes. So for little bits of detail like heads, I find odd numbers. For some reason, they're just more visually appealing to people than even numbers. In most cases, that is. This one, I'm not going to be as subtle with. I feel like I need to be. But it'd be quite nice to have something facing from this side of the base. I'm thinking maybe somewhere here would be pretty cool. If it's just resting between the bits of the pillar. This little back of the skull is kind of getting in the way, so I'm just going to trim that. You want it to look natural, you don't want it to look forced. That's when things start looking weird. You can tell when you look at the model. You don't want these guys to be the focus, so the more natural they look, the more inconspicuous and sort of hard to initially see the moment you set eyes on the model. You want, of course, the painted model to go on the base, to be the main focus. The base just, for me personally, I think a little bit of story, a little bit of context is really nice to add. But at the end of the day, it's the model you're sticking on the base that's the important thing. I'm just going to trim off a little bit more. How does that look? Maybe there, that'll be good. That'll be a nice little bit of detail to have. So, seems to fit naturally there, it falls into place. It's always a good sign. Take our glue, chuck it on there. Get our awkward to hold skull. And there we go. Now, you can tell there's a lot of empty space at the moment because I want to add vegetation later when we finish painting it. So I'll leave some areas just empty, little places we can have plants sticking out, just to add more points of interest. There we go. Next up is adding dirt and rubble, little bits of rock. Here we are on the dirt section and adding some terrain, some dirt, some little bits of rock. What I've got here is a tub full of actual dirt that I got from my back garden. I've got some larger bits of rock in there. I keep it in a tub, and then this has just lasted me so long. Give it a shake every so often just to crush up little bits. It's this fine, powdery stuff that we really want to use. I find this is so much better to use than sand. It's free if you live anywhere with dirt. And if it's wet dirt, just dry it out in the oven for a little bit. Obviously don't cook it, but it's invaluable stuff and it looks really, really nice. So this is what I'm going to be putting on the base. It's a bit hard to keep on camera, so I'll just move over here for now. And here it is, the base. Now I'm going to avoid putting anything on the area where I plan to glue the model. So I'm going to take our trusty paper clip and super glue. I'm just going to spread some super glue along. Just doing it in sections. You don't need to hit every surface. Just make sure you get the things you want. Now, with dirt, it can be a little bit messy, so if you want to put some t-shirt down or an old rag just to catch the excess dust and dirt, it might be a worthwhile idea. You can see I'm just sprinkling it on. And then I'm going to leave that just to soak up a little bit. Whilst I do that, I'm going to come and do with this side. I'm not getting any on the actual terrain pieces, the bits of detail we like, just because I don't want to ruin the detail with some dirt, dust, and rocks. I'm going to keep that as clean as possible when we come to paint it. This stuff is great. It basically, because of the super glue and how fast that dries, it basically attaches almost instantly. So what I'm going to do is pour off the excess, tap the base, give it a blow, and then you can see where it's stuck and where it hasn't stuck. So once again, get your paper clip, get some super glue. I'm just going to use the dripper ball now to be a little bit quicker about it all. You can double up on areas if you feel like they need more dirt, more texture. I'm just getting the really fine dusty parts of the mud, dried mud that I'm using. Just sprinkling on. Give it a couple of seconds. There, give it a blow. And just like that. I will go back to the paperclip just for these little underclip areas. Give me a bit more precision. You don't want to get the bottom faces of the bark. They're already nice and textured. We like how they're textured already. And voila. That is the mud and the dirt. Easy as that. Now, whilst I'm here, what I'm going to do is take a large, soft brush. Again, this is a cheapy one. I use this for brushing off mud and dust and everything. I don't want to use a fancy dry brush that I like. So I'm just brushing off all the excess. The large bits of rock I've got here. I'm going to ping that off. And there we've got some really nice detail, some really nice texture to the surface. And I think that is about ready to prime now. So I'm going to clean up the dirt and we'll get to painting. So I've gone ahead and I've base coated the top with Rhinoxide and left the underside blue. I'm doing this because I want the shadows and the dark area of the rock to look almost glacial, but the top to have kind of a warmer, more autumn forest, snowy forest look. Of course, once the snow's added, it'll cool it down a lot and it'll look very icy and very snowy. But for now, we're starting with this. Now I'm going to go and do a bit more work on the underside. To do that, I've got this color here. It's Araman Blue. And I've thinned it down to essentially a glaze consistency. You can see just how thin it is there. What I'm going to do with this is just in the ridges you can see a bit of fluff on the end. In the ridges you can see on the underside, I'm going to put lines in almost like the recesses. I want it to look like an icy glacier. Sort of the cold veins running through the rock. So very thin down, placing it in all the cracks and the recesses that I find. Really makes it look ice cold. What we want to go for the shade, the shadows of the rocks here. just like veins. It'll dry a lot less obvious than how it looks when you first put it on. It just means we can build it up and maybe bring in a lighter color, really accentuate that. Obviously, doing this because it's very thin. It just means we have more control over it. Makes a nice little contrast to the black base, so framing it even more. This will go really nicely with the snow on the surface when we put that on. Again, I'm just being careful to make sure that I don't get anything on the actual plinth. As I explained before, it'd be a bit of a pain to clean up. Right. So now what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to take a bit of a lighter color. I'm going to go for, let's have a look. That might be a bit too, in fact, I've got an idea. I'm going to take some white, watercolor white, put it up here on my palette. It comes out. I'm going to thin this down. The watercolor paints are already quite thin, opaque when you put them on, which is quite nice. What I'm going to do is very carefully pick out the almost like the core of the vein, the deepest recesses, the areas where the light is just shining through the icicles. Don't worry if it looks too garish, because we're going to do something in a second to bring it back. You don't want it to pick out every single little vein you've done. The odd one or two. Might be nice to have being a bit brighter than the rest. I'm not being especially neat with this. It's a very organic form, so you can get away with being a bit rough. As you can see, it's very bright. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with the Araman, and I'm just going to go right over all the white that we've just done. It'll do a much brighter layer of the blue. A lot colder. It'll really help that look like very shiny, very light highlight, because it's working off a white base almost. Makes it more obvious. And because the Araman's quite thinned, it goes over it really nicely. Doesn't drown it out. you get quite a cool glowing ice glacier effect. You can go over this multiple times. I think the white's coming through a bit strong. Wait for the previous glaze you did to dry. Come back, go over it again. Glazes dry pretty fast, so get this all done pretty fast too. Right, and I think that. Don't think we need a dry brush on it because it's on the underside, and the contrast between the dark and the blue really helps bring it together. So we're going to work on the top surface now, and then once that's done, we'll have more of an idea on what we need to do. Now, the colours I've got here are Rhinox Hide and Mornfang Brown. I've got, to start with, pure Rhinox Hide up here, and then I've got a 50-50 mix of Rhinox and Mornfang here, and then pure Mornfang. And what we're going to be doing is a bit of a wet blend. Now I've thinned these down, not quite as thin as a glaze, but still fairly thin. I'm just going to use my crappy old brush and smack it on here really roughly. I'm going to avoid the edges because we want our warm color to be focusing on the center of the mass. So this isn't a neat job, so I haven't got my fancy brushes out. Now I'm going to take some of the 50-50. This time I'm going to focus even harder towards the center, dabbing it around, not being neat with it at all. Then go to the straight Mornfang. I'm going to start in the middle and just sort of spread it out. You don't need the perfect blend. Very natural gradient, so it doesn't matter if it's perfect or not. For example, on the bit where the character is going to be pinned, it's going to be extremely rough, but the character's going to be pinned there, so it doesn't matter. Adding more and more Mornfang to the middle. What I'll do is I'll dry this with a hairbrush, and then we may come back for a second attempt or layer. It's pretty much dried. You can see very subtle, so I'm going to come in just Mornfang now. I'm going to pick out center mass, basically, of all the areas. This is pure Mornfang. It's very watered down, so it's pretty thin. Then what I'm going to do is take my 50-50 mix. You notice I'm not really washing my brush in between because of how rough and how much of a natural gradient I'm going for. There's no real need to do so. Bring it out a little bit more, and back to the straight Rhinox Hide for the edges. And what I'm going to do is take a bit more of my Mornfang. Because my old Mornfang's a bit thin. It's pretty diluted with the other browns at the moment. So once again, I'm going to thin this one out. Just Mornfang. I'm going to come in, basically dab it. Get the big central chunks. Nice bit of color variation. These are very autumn colors, but the snow will be covering most of it, so it doesn't really have to be the world's neatest blend. In fact, rough is probably better in this case. Now I'm going to leave it to dry and see how it looks after that second pass. It's looking a lot more Mornfang in the middle now. But one more should just about do it. Now this one's, again, incredibly rough. Pure Mornfang. There we go. Once that's dried, that'll look fine. And then we should be good to start dry brushing. That will be, honestly, that'll be almost all that terrain done. In fact, I can see a little bit here that I've missed. So what I'm going to do is just a tiny bit of Mornfang in there. And we're golden. So we've got a nice little gradient going on, nothing too extreme. What I want to do next is add a tiny little bit of definition before we do the dry brushing. Now, what I'm going to use is some Nuln Oil. Not much of this. I am going to be watering it down. You can see it's at the top of my palette there. So, not watering it down much, maybe like half. What we can do is bring that into the outer recesses first. And I'm not going crazy with it. Rough. More on the outside. And I'm going to wash my brush off. A little bit of clean water. I'm going to just drag the edges in with clean water. Just feathering. So just feathering in the shade. Every so often wiping off the brush. Once again, I'm using a very crappy cheap brush for this because it's likely to mess up the bristles of any other brush. And that is that. It's just a quick little picking out some recessed details. Trying not to forget little areas like this that I keep forgetting. And once this is dry, we can move on to the dry brushing. Looking pretty warm at the moment in comparison to the underside, but once we add the white on, or the snow effect at the very end, it'll really bring it together and tie the two colors together really nicely. A little bit of a white that I've missed off there. Catch that quickly. Right, as I was saying, dry brushing. What I'm going to do for this is, because of the brown we're using, I'm going to pick Steel Legion Drab. The first pass of dry brushing. Put some on my palette. I'm not going to thin this down at all. I'm going to take an old piece of t-shirt, one that I usually wipe all my paint off. I'm going to find a dry brush. Make sure the bristles are apart, separated. And what I'm going to do is Stick some on the end. Dab it into the t-shirt. Wipe off a fair amount. Place it on your hand. And then bring it onto the base. Now I'm just going to do the outer edges of this, just because they won't really show up on the Morn Fan Brown. Being careful not to catch the plinth at all. You start to see it picking up some detail. It might be a bit light. We can always just go over again with another color, which I think I'm going to do. Now I'm not going to wash the brush off, just because we've only just put some paint on there. I'm going to move to Bane Brown. The reason I'm not washing my paint off is because it hasn't dried out, and I don't want to wash it yet because the moisture will stay in there for a little bit. It'll sort of make a mess of the whole dry brushing. Here we go. This is more obvious. You can really start to see this together now. Now the underside looks great without a dry brush, so I don't need to come in and do that. And at the end of the day, it would be far too awkward. It just would not be fun. I'd probably end up getting it all over the plinth. That would be a pain in the ass. So got a smaller brush here just to try and catch the edge there. I think that's all we need. Now, the next color, what I'm going to do is take some Shabty Bone. Bit of that. I'm not mixing any of these paints when you're dry brushing, you don't need to do that. They work far better straight out of the pot. Just very gently. I suppose that, I guess, counts as mucking something up. I managed to get it on my glove. Now, just make sure the surface is smooth. Fortunately, because of the location of this, I can come in with the airbrush, just do that, and it won't affect any of the painting we've done. So, I'll do that in a minute. Everyone makes mistakes. And that should be good. Right, I'm going to go fix this, and then we'll move on to the next step. I am back, and I've fixed my little mistake. Like I said, mistakes happen. Usually they're easily fixable. So now I'm going to start picking out the rocks, or the bits of ruin that we've got going on here. I'm going to do that with blue grey pale from Vallejo model color. Give that a good shake. Get some of that on the palette. Crappy big brush. Now I'm using this brush quite a lot for this, because at this stage we don't need to be neat. The things that I'm going to be using my fancy artist opus brushes for are the things like painting the helmet and painting the skulls, maybe some details on the rock, like chips or cracks, stuff like that. So, crappy brush. What I'm going to do is just base coat it. Really nice coverage on this one, which shouldn't take that many layers. I've only thinned it down a little bit. Just going right up to the connection here. These little bits of rail, the little bits with the bobbles on them, I don't need to hit them because I'm going to paint them up slightly differently. So I've done the rock. So I'm just going to base coat all the areas in that. I've base coated the stone, and what I've done here is I've put a dark tone on the undersides where the shadows would be. I've just done a little bit of dry brushing just to sort of meld them in together, and now I'm going to bring some shades in, weather it up a little bit. I've got Nuln Oil and Agrax Air Shade. Mix these up. Hopefully this will just help dirty up the rock. From there we can build back up again. Something cool. I'm going to go for I'm going to mix them about 50-50. See how that looks. Maybe water it down just a tad. There you go. I'm just going to very sloppily just coat this over everything. Make sure it goes in all the nooks and the crannies. One thing you can do actually is dip between and just get certain patches here and there with specific shades. Just help get a little bit of colours in, little differences here and there. I'm not trying to be the world's neatest painters at this stage. I'm just trying to build a foundation for us to work on later. Places where it's really, really pulling in, you can move around and change. One thing I'm going to do is take a little bit of Seraphim Sepia. I'm going to use this very sparingly, or at least a little bit sparingly. It's a very saturated colour. So towards the bottom I'm going to be using this, closer towards the ground. And then I'll leave that to dry. I'll come back to it. So the shade is dried. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some black grey and this colour here. If I just put it on the palette, I'm going to mix a little bit of our blue-grey pale in with it. See there? Then I'm going to thin it down, really thin it down. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the ends here, all these bits of rock. I'm going to sort of rough glaze them up towards the highest point. A little bit more of the dark. I'm just going to build this up and up so we can see a rough transition start to appear. It goes to darker color of stone. Now, roughness kind of works in our favor here, just because of the nature of the material. Stone is a very rough material. It's not smooth at release. I'm not painting it to be smooth today. What I'm going to do is I'm just adding more of the black grey. It's almost all of that. Come in again. Been really, really, really rough with it. This is again where a nice, crappy old brush is super useful, because I don't need to worry about this brush going naff. I can buy another one for barely anything. Starting to get a bit of a transition going there. Up here on my palette, I've just added some dark sea blue, the same color we used for the base coat for the underside AC area. What I'm going to do, I've really thinned this down, is I'm going to pick some of the underside shadows of the stone. Just to really reinforce the cold shadows that we've got going on. It's almost like an object source lighting kind of thing, but not quite. Just adding shadows here and there. And what I've done is I've added a little bit of the Araman blue in the same way we did with the underside, but just very subtly, just to once again create that shadow, that blue underside shadow we've been going for. Now, I'm going to dry brush the rock here. I've got some pale, blue-grey pale. You could use Administratum Grey, but I kind of like the cold bluish. I've done the dry brushing. It looks good, and I've gone in and base coated all the rusted metal parts as well, just to get them out of the way. Base coating, because nobody wants to watch that. And next up, we're gonna put some weathering, some grossness on the rusted areas. So I've got some more on there. Mournfang brown here. It's very watered down. Not quite a glaze consistency, but almost there. Okay, you can see it a bit better now. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to just paint it onto all the metallic areas we've got. Very rough and random. Just sort of thinking where rust would come up first. So around ears and rivets and stuff like that. These skulls, and the eyes. Water would sort of collect and pool there. And because this is quite thin, when it dries, it'll be subtle. As I've said before, it just means we've got more control over it. So I have just added some Fire Dragon Bright to the palette. It's incredibly watered down. Just about a glaze consistency, as you can see there, just quite how thin that is. Now, just like before we did with the Mournfang Brown, I'm going to come back and do the same with this, but more select areas. You can see I'm adding some drips and stuff. I might have run down. So next I've taken some more Mornfang Brown. I've mixed in the tiniest little bit of Rhinox hide. And this is even thinner than a glaze I've mixed this to. So what I'm going to do here is just add some streaks. So things where, imagine the rust would have ran down over time. You can even use this for adding some little bits of weathering and dirt muck build-up in the rock. Just in areas where this kind of stuff would settle naturally. It helps bring out the detail a little bit more. Brings it back in with the base, color-wise. Starting to get some nice weathering in there. And I think now I'm ready to paint up the helmet and the skulls. I'm not going to film that just because they're not really, like, they can be painted anytime. There'll be other tutorials for the skulls and Death Guard, but they're not entirely relevant to the base. So I'll go and do that. Painted in all the details. The skull's done. The little helmet done. And we are done now for painting. Next up comes foliage. And then we can add snow. You'll notice I've got 3 little holes drilled here, here, and here. I've done this, but when I add the long, wiry grass foliage, this just will be so I can feed them in and glue them in. And if there's anything around it, then, or like any bits of middle showing through, I can just cover that with paint or snow. Now, the first foliage I'll be using will be the long stuff, and that is dried vines. It looks like this. This is one of my favorite pieces of foliage to use, but it is incredibly messy. It looks great as sort of dead winter bushes, but it is a real pain just because of how messy it is. Lots of little leaf bits everywhere. So I'll show you how exactly I go about making my wintry bushes. So what I'll do, I'll take a length out and I'll fold it in half and then fold it in half again to wherever I feel happy. And I'll just really, really tightly spin it up So just move this that way. Really compact it in there. Then I want to cut off this little bobble end. Find my tweezers, and then we can try and feed it in one of these holes. Now, I'm not trimming any of this yet. I'm going to leave that until I'm ready. All three of them are in. That seems like a good fit. I'm going to grab my tweezers if I can find them. There we go. And just to be sure, give them another big roll. Take some super glue, pop it in the hole, tweezers, just feed it in as best as I can. Oh, the super glue is great, it'll just hold it exactly where I need it. There we go. I'm going to repeat that a couple of times in the other two holes. And then we can trim it up and make it look natural. We have glued them in. As you can see, they're looking pretty rough. There's got a couple of loops in there because of how we made these. So what I'm going to do is just go through each bush and cut through the loops. These are just the closed ones that happen because of the nature of how we made these. Now, what I'm going to do is trim them. So I've got a rough height I know I want it to be. I'm just starting off rough. You don't need to be a professional barber or hairdresser for this. Yeah, these bushes are great. They look fantastic. Once they've got some snow on them, they look even better. There we go. I think that's all right. Just going to ruffle them up a bit. Get rid of the random little pieces. And there you have it. Nice little bushes. And now, final part, to add some snow. And now that we're on our last stage, we can bring in Valhalla Blizzard. Now, I love this stuff, creating a snow texture. It's the best one I've found. It's a really, really nice finish to it. It looks just like snow. And honestly, I've not seen many other products that do as good a job as it does. So I've got my trusty tool here. And what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to avoid this area here, because that's where the model's going to connect. But I'm just going to grab this Allen Blizzard, put a bit on there, push it around, and this is basically it. Not much else to it. This will really tie everything together, make it look nice and wintry. At the moment it's very autumn. We want to really winter this up, get it nice and cold. You don't want to plaster the whole base. You want to leave some spots. Well, it depends. If you want to go real snowy with it, go for it. You can see now what I meant earlier when I was talking about how a lot of the work, the terrain isn't going to be entirely visible, and there is nothing wrong with that. It's just there in case there is a spot or two where it is. Like I was saying, you never really know, especially if it's in a contest or something. Everyone's going to be looking at it in every angle, every which way you can imagine. So, better to be safe than sorry. And well, yeah. One thing for the plants, what I like to do is just chuck a bunch of snow in there, and with my fingers, I'll just mix it all around and work it in amongst all the roots and the vines and the leaves. Give it a shake. And you've got like a snowy bush. You can apply a bit more directly to the roots to really help it fit in. But essentially, that's what I'll be doing. I'll go ahead and finish this off camera and then show you exactly how it looks. And there we have it. I've applied the snow. I've put it in all the bushes. You can see the heads showing through there. It's looking good. Little skull in there. Skull there. And yeah, the little patch there, that'll be where I glue the base of the figure on. But that's why I've left it bare. But once I do glue it in, I'll just cover that bit with snow as well. So hopefully you've learned a thing or two from this video. Hopefully you've figured something out. Maybe you've got some inspiration. But yeah, overall it's a good fun video. Love making these bases. These snow bases look great. You know, really simple to do. So yeah, thank you for watching.